The lecture hall buzzed with the soft conversations of 200 students from across the galaxy. Professor Zenthara's 4 eyes swept across the tiered seating, noting the careful segregation that had developed naturally over the semester. The crystalline Veltai clustered together, their bodies chiming softly as they communicated through harmonic frequencies. The gaseous Eighth Mori occupied the specialized atmospheric seats, their forms shifting like colored clouds in transparent containers. The insectoid Kretek clicked and chittered among themselves, their compound eyes glinting under the artificial suns that lit the chamber. And then there were the mammals. The Gornathi with their thick, leathery hides and tusked faces. The feline Sylvan with their graceful forms and predatory grace. The aquatic Murdani in their mobility suits, and scattered among them, a handful of beings from dozens of other worlds. In the back corner, isolated as always, sat Terra Hartwell. Zenthara's primary eyes focused on the human girl, while his secondary pair continued scanning the room. At 19 standard galactic years, Terra was young even by human standards, yet she carried herself with a poise that made most of his other students uncomfortable. Her dark hair was pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, revealing the pale skin that marked her as a surface dweller from the infamous third planet of the Sol system, Earth, the Deathworld. Even now, 3 months into the semester, most students gave Terra a wide berth. It wasn't personal hatred, Zenthara knew. It was evolutionary wisdom. Every instinct in their DNA screamed warnings when they looked at her. The way she moved, the way her forward-facing eyes tracked everything in her environment, the casual strength in her movements. All of it marked her as what she was. An apex predator from a world where survival itself was an achievement worthy of celebration. Professor Zenthara clicked his mandibles to gain attention, and the chamber gradually fell silent. Today we begin our study of planetary adaptation and survival strategies across the galaxy, he announced, his voice translated into dozens of languages by the universal communicators each student wore. We will examine how different species have evolved to thrive in their native environments, and how these adaptations serve them when they venture beyond their homeworlds. A hand shot up from the Gornathi section. Zenthara nodded toward the massive, tusked student. Yes, Gruktar? Professor, why do we need to study adaptation when most civilized worlds have been terraformed to standard galactic norms? Surely this is outdated information in our modern age. Gruktar's tusks gleamed as he spoke, and several other students nodded in agreement. Zenthara's antennae twitched in what those familiar with his species recognized as mild amusement. An excellent question, however. I would argue that understanding adaptation is more crucial now than ever before. As we expand into unexplored sectors, we encounter worlds that cannot be easily terraformed, environments that challenge our assumptions about what life can endure. His eyes drifted toward Terra, who was taking notes on an old-fashioned paper notebook rather than using a holographic display like the other students. Moreover, some species have developed such remarkable adaptive capabilities that they serve as excellent examples for the rest of us. From the Sylvan section, a lean student with golden fur and sharp claws raised her hand. You mean the Veltai crystal regeneration abilities? Or the Aethmori atmospheric manipulation? Those are certainly impressive, Zenthara agreed. But I was thinking of something far more extraordinary. Tell me, how many of you know the classification of the human homeworld? The chamber fell silent. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Terra looked up from her notebook, her brown eyes meeting the professor's gaze steadily. There was no challenge in her expression, no defiance, just patient attention. Somehow, that made her even more unsettling to watch. From the middle section, a Kretek student's wings buzzed nervously as he spoke. Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, Professor, one of only 15 known planets in that category. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the Veltai stopped their harmonic humming. Correct, Zenthara said softly. Class 12. For those unfamiliar with the classification system, this means Earth is considered barely habitable even with advanced technology. The planet features extreme weather patterns, toxic atmospheric conditions in many regions, radiation exposure, And perhaps most remarkably, an ecosystem built entirely around predation and survival of the fittest. A Gornathi student, different from the first, raised his hand tentatively. But Professor, if it's so dangerous, how did humans develop civilization? How did they develop space travel? Zenthara's secondary eyes focused on Terra again. She had stopped writing and was now listening with obvious interest, as if she had never considered this question before. That, the professor said, is the most remarkable part. Humans didn't just survive on Earth. They thrived. They became the dominant species through sheer adaptability, and what many xenobiologists consider to be the most efficient survival instinct ever documented. The golden-furred Sylvain leaned forward in her seat. But they're so small and soft. They have no natural weapons, no protective carapace, no environmental resistances. How could they possibly dominate a death world? Before Zenthara could answer, another voice cut through the chamber. It came from the very back, from a section typically occupied by the larger, more aggressive species from high-gravity worlds. Because they're clever little parasites who develop tools to compensate for their natural weakness. Every eye in the room turned toward the speaker. Torgash of the Hectare rose from his seat, his massive form easily twice the size of any other student present. His species hailed from a world with 3 times galactic standard gravity, and their physical power was legendary throughout the civilized galaxy. Thick, armored skin-covered muscles that could crush steel, and the curved horn protruding from his forehead was sharp enough to pierce ship's hull plating. Torgash, Professor Zenthara warned, his voice carrying clear disapproval. But the Hectare student wasn't finished, his small, dark eyes fixed on Terra, who still sat calmly in her isolated corner. We all dance around the truth, because we're supposed to be civilized now, but everyone knows what humans really are. They're weak, pathetic creatures who compensate for their inadequacies by building weapons and hiding behind technology. Strip away their tools, and they're nothing but soft meat. The tension in the room ratcheted up several degrees. Other students shifted nervously, some moving slightly away from both Torgash and Terra. Terra herself seemed completely unaffected. She finished writing something in her notebook, then looked up at Torgash with mild curiosity. "Interesting theory," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without any need to raise it. "Did you develop it yourself? Or is that standard Hectare philosophy?" Torgash's face darkened. "Are you mocking me, Deathworlder?" "Not at all. I'm genuinely curious about the reasoning behind your conclusion." Terra closed her notebook and stood up, moving with the fluid grace that all humans seem to possess. "It's fascinating how different species interpret the concept of strength." "There's nothing to interpret," Torgash snarled, taking a step down from his elevated position. "Strength is simple. Physical power, natural weapons, the ability to dominate through force. Your species has none of these things." "Torgash, return to your seat immediately," Professor Zenthara commanded, but the large student ignored him completely. Terra descended the steps toward the main floor of the lecture hall, moving at an unhurried pace that somehow suggested complete confidence rather than retreat. "You're absolutely right about humans lacking natural physical weapons," she admitted freely. "No claws, no fangs, no armor plating. We're remarkably fragile compared to most galactic species. Finally, some honesty." Torgash rumbled, continuing his own descent toward the center of the chamber. "So you admit your species is inferior?" "I admit we're different," Terra corrected, reaching the bottom of the steps. The main floor was a circular space designed for demonstrations, with stadium seating rising around it on all sides. "Whether that makes us inferior depends entirely on how you define strength, doesn't it?" By now, Torgash had reached the demonstration floor as well. Standing at his full height, he towered over Terra by more than 1.5 meters. His massive form cast a shadow that engulfed her completely. "This is how I define strength," he said, flexing arms that were thicker than Terra's entire torso. "Muscle, bone, natural weapons forged by evolution itself. Not the artificial crutches your kind depends on." Terra nodded thoughtfully. That's certainly one valid definition. Your people are impressively adapted for high-gravity environments and close-quarters combat. The efficiency of your musculature is remarkable. For a moment, Torgash looked surprised by the genuine respect in her voice. Then his expression hardened again. Don't try to flatter your way out of this, human. Your soft words won't change reality. I'm not trying to change anything, Tara said simply. But since we're discussing definitions of strength, would you like to see a demonstration of the human approach? Ike? Professor Zenthara started to intervene again, but something in Tara's tone stopped him. There was no bravado in her voice, no anger or fear. She sounded like an instructor about to begin a lesson. Torgash laughed, a sound like grinding stone. A demonstration? What are you going to do, Deathworlder? Lecture me to death? Oh no, Tara said, still in that same conversational tone. I was thinking something much more direct. She reached into the small pack she carried and withdrew something that made half the students in the chamber gasp in alarm. It was clearly a weapon, though unlike anything in the standard galactic arsenal. A simple length of steel, slightly curved, with a wrapped grip and a guard that separated the blade from the handle, ancient by any civilized standard. Yet the way the light caught the edge spoke of a sharpness that could split atoms. What is that primitive thing? Torgash demanded, though he had taken an instinctive step backward. This, Tara said, holding the weapon with casual familiarity, is called a katana. It's a weapon developed by my people approximately 3,000 standard years ago, before we had energy weapons, before we had ship-mounted armaments, before we even had gunpowder. She moved the blade in a slow, graceful arc, and every student in the chamber felt their breath catch. The movement was so smooth, so perfectly controlled, that it seemed less like a weapon drill and more like a form of art. You want to talk about natural weapons? Tara continued, her voice never losing its educational tone. This is what humans developed when we had nothing but our minds and the raw materials of our world. No evolutionary gifts. No inherited advantages. Just the need to survive. And the intelligence to adapt. Torgash's initial surprise was rapidly giving way to anger. You think that antique frightens me? I could snap it in half with my bare hands. You probably could, Tara agreed. The steel isn't designed to withstand the kind of pressure you can generate. But that's not really the point, is it? She shifted her stance slightly, and suddenly every predatory species in the room felt their danger instincts spike. The change was subtle. The way her weight distributed, the angle of her shoulders, the relaxed readiness in her arms, but the message was unmistakable. The point, Tara said, is that this weapon represents the fundamental difference between human adaptation and evolution, as it occurred on most other worlds. You developed natural weapons because your environment demanded immediate survival advantages. We developed something much more flexible. Without warning, Torgash's patience snapped entirely. With a roar that echoed through the chamber, he lunged forward, his massive fists swinging toward Tara with enough force to crush bone. Tara moved. Later, when students tried to describe what they had witnessed, they struggled to find adequate words. It wasn't that Tara was fast. Exactly. Though she was certainly quicker than anyone had expected, it was that she seemed to flow around Torgash's attack like water, never quite being where his devastating strength could reach her. The Hektar's first punch met empty air as Tara slipped sideways, her blade moving in a controlled arc that stopped just short of his extended arm. His second swing came closer, but she was already spinning away, the katana tracing silver lines through the space between them. Torgash's third attempt was more calculated, a grappling move designed to use his superior reach and mass to pin her down. Tara dropped low, swept one of his legs, and when he stumbled, the tip of her blade was suddenly at his throat. The entire exchange had lasted perhaps 10 seconds. You see, Tara said, not even breathing hard, humans didn't develop natural weapons because we developed something better. We learned to think our way out of problems. Torgash froze, feeling the razor edge against his skin. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? Tara's voice remained calm, but something in her eyes had changed. For just a moment, every student in the chamber saw past the veneer of civilization to the predator beneath. This is what you don't understand about Deathworlders, Torgash. On my homeworld, mercy is a luxury. Hesitation gets you killed. Everything, and I mean everything, is trying to eat you, poison you, or tear you apart. The tip of the blade pressed just slightly closer. We didn't develop natural weapons because we developed something infinitely more dangerous. We learned to make anything into a weapon. Rocks, sticks, water, fire, air pressure, gravity, radiation, anything and everything became a tool for survival. She paused, letting that sink in. But most importantly, we learned to think like predators while maintaining the pack intelligence of social creatures. We became persistence hunters who could coordinate, plan, and adapt in real time to any threat. Professor Zenthara found his voice at last. Terra, I think you've made your point. Terra blinked, and suddenly she was just a young student again. The predatory intensity vanished as if it had never existed. She stepped back from Torgash, lowering her weapon. I apologize if that demonstration was excessive, she said to the professor, but I thought it might be relevant to today's lesson on adaptation strategies. The Hectar student stood frozen for several seconds longer, his hand moving unconsciously to his throat, where a thin red line marked where the blade had touched. When he finally looked at Terra again, his expression had changed completely. How? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you do that? Terra slid the katana back into its sheath with practiced ease. 17 years of training, 3 hours of practice every day since I could hold a sword, and approximately 3 million years of evolutionary pressure that selected for beings capable of surviving on a world that actively tried to kill them. She looked around the chamber, meeting the stunned gazes of 200 students from across the galaxy. But that's just one tiny example of human adaptation, she continued. Would anyone like to learn about the others? The lecture hall remained absolutely silent for several heartbeats after Terra's question. Professor Zenthara's 4 eyes darted between his human student and the rest of the class, clearly uncertain whether to resume control of his lecture or allow this unexpected development to continue. The decision was made for him when a tentative voice spoke from the Veltai section. The crystalline being's harmonic tones translated to, I would like to know about human adaptations. I, 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 I. Terra smiled, and remarkably, it was a genuinely warm expression that made her seem much less intimidating. Thank you. What's your name? Harmony of 7 crystals, but most call me 7. Thank you, 7. Before we continue, though, I should probably apologize to Torgash. Terra turned toward the Hectar student, who was still standing motionless in the center of the demonstration floor. I didn't mean to be aggressive or disrespectful. You raised valid questions about human capabilities, and I thought a practical demonstration might be more educational than theoretical discussion. Torgash stared at her for a long moment, his massive hand still touching his throat. When he finally spoke, his voice was much quieter than before. You could have killed me. Yes. Terra agreed without hesitation. But that would have been wasteful and counterproductive. Dead people can't learn. Quote. But why didn't you? Your reputation. Your species' reputation. You could have eliminated a rival. Shown dominance. Instead, you pulled back. Terra tilted her head slightly, genuinely puzzled. Why would I want to hurt you? You weren't actually threatening me. Just questioning human capabilities. That's not worthy of violence. A new voice entered the conversation. This one from the Aeth Mori section. The gaseous being's translated words carried curiosity. But surely the combat instincts of a Deathworld predator would demand retaliation for the challenge to your status. Ah, Terra said, her eyes lighting up with understanding. Now that's a fascinating question about adaptation. See, most people assume that coming from a Deathworld means humans are naturally violent or aggressive. But that's not actually how adaptation works on Earth. She began walking around the demonstration floor as she spoke, her movements casual but purposeful. Earth is dangerous. Yes, but not in the way most people imagine. It's not just giant predators and obvious threats. The real danger is the sheer complexity of overlapping environmental pressures. Professor Zenthara quietly activated the chamber's holographic projectors, allowing Tara to illustrate her points. "Thank you, Professor. May I?" He nodded, clearly fascinated despite himself. Tara gestured, and a three-dimensional image of Earth appeared in the center of the chamber. Our homeworld experiences extreme climate variations, tectonic activity, severe weather patterns, and what we call mass extinction events, roughly every 65 million years. But that's just the planetary level. The image zoomed in to show various ecosystems. At the local level, we have environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests to active volcanic regions. Temperature variations of over 100 degrees Celsius between seasons in some areas, atmospheric pressure changes, radiation exposure, toxic gases in certain regions. A Cretech student's wings buzzed as he spoke. But many worlds have challenging environments. What makes Earth unique? The ecosystem, Tara replied immediately. See, on most worlds, evolution produces cooperative relationships, symbiosis, mutualism, environmental harmony. On Earth, everything is trying to kill everything else. The hologram shifted to show a food web of staggering complexity. We have parasites that control their host's behavior, plants that are deadly poison, bacteria that can dissolve flesh, insects that can carry diseases capable of wiping out entire civilizations. We have weather patterns that can destroy continents, and geological events that can alter the entire planetary climate. Seven's crystalline form chimed softly. How did any species survive such conditions? Very carefully, Tara said with a slight smile. But humans survived through a very specific set of adaptations that, taken together, made us uniquely suited for that kind of environment. She gestured again, and the hologram shifted to show early human development. First, persistence. We developed the ability to pursue goals over extended time periods despite setbacks, failures, and changing conditions. Most species on Earth develop specialized survival strategies. Humans developed adaptability itself as a strategy. The image showed humans in various environments: deserts, snow-covered mountains, tropical jungles, coastal regions. Second, social cooperation despite individual differences. Most pack species cooperate because they're similar. Humans learn to cooperate specifically because we're different. We develop the ability to combine diverse skills, perspectives, and capabilities to solve problems no individual could handle alone. Torgash, who had finally moved from his frozen position, spoke up. But cooperation exists throughout the galaxy. That's not unique to humans. True, Tara agreed. But human cooperation is different. Watch this. She manipulated the hologram to show a human settlement under threat from multiple directions. A natural disaster approaching from one side, hostile wildlife from another, and resource scarcity from a third. Most species would focus on the primary threat, address it, then move to secondary concerns. Humans developed something called parallel processing under pressure. The holographic humans split into groups, each tackling different aspects of the crisis simultaneously while maintaining communication and coordination. We can consciously divide our attention and resources to address multiple existential threats at once, adapting our approach in real time as conditions change. A Sylvan student raised her hand. That sounds like it would lead to confusion and wasted effort. It would, if we weren't also adapted for rapid information processing and decision-making under stress, Tara replied. Which brings us to the third adaptation: enhanced pattern recognition. The hologram shifted again, this time showing a complex environment filled with subtle dangers. Camouflaged predators, poisonous plants that looked identical to safe ones, unstable terrain, weather signs indicating incoming storms. Humans developed the ability to process vast amounts of environmental data simultaneously and identify patterns that indicate opportunities or threats. We can consciously notice things we didn't consciously look for, then rapidly adjust our behavior based on partial information. She paused, looking around the chamber. How many of you noticed that Torgash was preparing to attack before he actually moved? Silence. I saw the shift in his breathing pattern, the way his weight distributed to his forward foot, the micro-expressions that indicated transition from verbal to physical confrontation mode, and the angle of his shoulders that suggested he was targeting my center of mass for a grappling attack. I processed all of that information in about half a second, and began formulating appropriate responses. Torgash stared at her. You knew I was going to attack before I attacked? I knew you were considering it before you decided to do it, Tara corrected gently. And that brings us to Adaptation 4, Threat Assessment and Response Calibration. The hologram showed various scenarios where humans encountered danger. Most species have binary threat responses: fight or flee. Humans developed a spectrum of responses calibrated to the severity and nature of each specific threat. She gestured to different scenes: humans avoiding a dangerous area entirely, humans negotiating with a potential threat, humans using tools to neutralize a threat without violence, humans forming alliances against common threats, and yes, humans fighting when necessary. The goal is never to be the most dangerous thing in the environment, Tara explained. The goal is to be the most adaptable thing in the environment. Sometimes that means being very dangerous. Sometimes it means being very peaceful. Sometimes it means being very clever. And sometimes it means being very cooperative. An Aethmori student's gaseous form rippled with what translated as confusion. But how do you determine which response is appropriate? Experience, education, and what we call situational awareness, Tara replied, which leads us to Adaptation 5, Learning and Teaching Complex Skills Across Generations. The hologram shifted to show human knowledge transfer, parents teaching children, teachers instructing students, experts training apprentices, written records preserving information across centuries. Most species pass on genetic adaptations through biological inheritance. Humans pass on learned adaptations through cultural inheritance. Each generation doesn't have to rediscover survival techniques. They build on the accumulated knowledge of everyone who came before them. Seven's crystals chimed with interest. So human children are taught survival skills from birth? In various forms, yes. But more than that, we're taught how to learn new skills rapidly when we encounter unfamiliar situations. Tara's expression grew more serious, because on Earth, the environment changes constantly. Techniques that work in one situation might be deadly in another. She manipulated the hologram to show seasonal changes, climate shifts, natural disasters, and ecosystem changes over time. A human who learns only specific responses to specific threats won't survive long. A human who learns how to analyze new situations and develop new responses will thrive almost anywhere. The chamber fell quiet as students contemplated this information. Finally, Professor Zenthara spoke. Tara, you mentioned this was just one tiny example of human adaptation. What other examples would you consider significant? Tara's eyes brightened. Oh, there are so many. Tool creation and modification. For instance, most species develop specific tools for specific purposes. Humans develop the ability to create new tools from available materials to meet immediate needs. The hologram showed humans throughout history, crafting weapons from bones and stones, creating shelter from local vegetation, developing medicine from plant materials, building vehicles from scavenged components. We call it MacGyvering. The ability to solve complex problems using only the materials immediately at hand, combined with basic scientific principles and creative thinking. A Gornathi student raised his tusked head. But surely tool creation is a sign of intelligence rather than adaptation. Actually, it's both, Tara replied. Intelligence without the drive to create tools remains theoretical. Tool creation without the intelligence to understand underlying principles remains limited. Humans developed what we call applied intelligence under pressure. The hologram shifted to show humans in crisis situations. Shipwrecked on hostile shores, trapped in collapsed buildings, stranded in space with failing life support. In each case, the humans rapidly assessed available resources and created solutions using improvised tools and techniques. "We don't just use intelligence to understand our environment," Terra explained. "We use intelligence to modify our environment to better suit our needs, or to create new environments entirely when the existing one becomes unsuitable." Torgash spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You mean humans change their environment rather than adapting to it?" "We do both, simultaneously," Terra corrected. "We adapt ourselves to survive in hostile environments, while simultaneously modifying those environments to become less hostile. It's a parallel process." The hologram showed human settlements, underground cities in Arctic regions, floating platforms on ocean worlds, sealed habitats on airless moons, terraforming projects on barren planets. "But the really interesting adaptation is what we call psychological resilience," Terra continued. "Humans develop the ability to maintain mental stability and decision-making capability, even when facing extended periods of extreme stress, uncertainty, and loss." The images shifted to show humans in various desperate situations. Survivors of natural disasters, explorers in uncharted territories, refugees fleeing danger, soldiers in combat, scientists working on generation-spanning projects. Most intelligent species experience psychological breakdown when subjected to prolonged stress or uncertainty. Humans certainly feel the stress, but we've developed mental techniques to continue functioning effectively even under conditions that would incapacitate other species. Seven's harmonics conveyed amazement. "How is such a thing possible?" "Practice," Terra said simply. "Remember, we evolved on a world where psychological breakdown meant death. Humans who couldn't maintain mental stability in crisis situations didn't survive to reproduce. Those who could develop techniques to help others do the same." She gestured, and the hologram showed human cultural practices: storytelling, music, humor, rituals, games, art, and various forms of group bonding. We developed elaborate cultural systems designed to build and maintain psychological resilience in our populations. Stories that teach problem-solving techniques, humor that helps process stress and fear, rituals that provide stability during uncertainty, art that helps process trauma and loss. The demonstration continued for several more minutes, covering human adaptations for group coordination, resource management, long-term planning, cross-species communication, and what Terra called civilizational resilience, the ability to rebuild and continue progressing even after catastrophic setbacks. Finally, as the holographic projectors powered down, Terra looked around the chamber at 200 faces, showing various expressions of fascination, concern, and newfound respect. "But perhaps the most important adaptation," she said quietly, "is what we call ethical flexibility. Humans learn to maintain core moral principles while adapting our specific behaviors to meet the requirements of changing situations." She looked directly at Torgash. "For instance, I'm perfectly capable of killing when necessary, but I'm also capable of showing mercy, forming alliances, sharing knowledge, and protecting those who might otherwise be considered rivals or enemies. The situation determines which capability I employ." Torgash nodded slowly. "And you determined that our situation called for teaching rather than fighting." "Exactly. Though I was prepared to fight if you had continued escalating the threat." Terra's smile was gentle, but somehow unsettling. "The point is, humans don't have just one response to challenges. We have dozens of responses, and we're constantly developing new ones." Professor Zenthara finally stepped forward. "Terra, this has been remarkably educational, but I think perhaps we should return to the planned curriculum." "Of course, Professor. Thank you for allowing the demonstration." Terra began walking back toward her seat, then paused. "Though if anyone has specific questions about human adaptations, I'd be happy to discuss them after class." As she climbed the steps back to her isolated corner, the chamber buzzed with dozens of conversations in various languages. The careful segregation that had existed at the beginning of class was already beginning to break down as students from different species began talking to each other about what they had witnessed. Tara had just reached her seat when 7 different students called out simultaneously, "Tara, can you teach us how to do that sword thing?" Tara. The chaos that followed Tara's offer to teach sword techniques was unlike anything Professor Zenthara had experienced in his 40-year teaching career. Students from a dozen different species were suddenly on their feet, abandoning their carefully maintained social boundaries as they converged on the demonstration floor. "One at a time, please," Tara said, raising her hands with an amused expression. "And before anyone gets too excited, I should mention that sword work isn't something you learn in an afternoon. It takes years to develop even basic competency." A Sylvan student with silver-striped fur practically bounced in place. "But you could show us the beginning movements?" "And the breathing pattern," added 7, her crystals chiming eagerly. "I noticed your respiratory cycle changed just before you moved." Tara looked around at the eager faces surrounding her, then glanced up at Professor Zenthara. "Professor, would it be appropriate to use the remaining class time for a practical demonstration of human teaching methods?" Zenthara's antennae twitched with what might have been exasperation or amusement. "I suppose today's lesson has already deviated significantly from my planned curriculum." "Very well, but keep it educational." "Absolutely." Tara moved to the center of the demonstration space, and the other students naturally formed a circle around her. "The first thing to understand is that human martial arts aren't just about fighting. They're comprehensive systems for physical conditioning, mental discipline, and what we call embodied philosophy." She demonstrated a basic stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed, arms relaxed at her sides. This position is called natural stance. It looks simple, but it incorporates several Deathworld survival principles. 7. You mentioned breathing. Can you observe how my breathing pattern affects my stability? 7's crystalline form shifted as she focused intently. After a moment, her harmonic tones conveyed surprise. Your breathing is synchronized with micro-adjustments in your balance. Each exhale corresponds to a slight redistribution of weight. Exactly. On Earth, maintaining perfect balance isn't just about static positioning. It's about dynamic adjustment to changing conditions. Uneven ground, shifting weather, unexpected obstacles. So we develop breathing patterns that automatically maintain stability even when we're not consciously thinking about it. A Cretech student's compound eyes glittered with interest. "But how does this relate to weapon use?" Tara drew her katana again, moving slowly so everyone could observe the details. "Watch the relationship between my breathing, my stance, and my blade position." She moved through a series of basic cuts, each motion flowing seamlessly into the next. The sword doesn't operate independently from the body. It becomes an extension of the body's natural movement patterns. This way, even in a crisis situation when conscious thought is impossible, muscle memory can take over. Torgash, who had been watching silently from the edge of the group, finally spoke. "But why develop such complex techniques for a simple tool? Wouldn't it be more efficient to rely on natural weapons?" Tara paused in her demonstration. "That's actually the fundamental philosophical difference between Deathworld and standard galactic approaches to survival. Most species develop specialized solutions for specific problems. Humans develop adaptable solutions for unknown problems." She sheathed her sword and looked around the circle of students. "For instance, this sword was originally designed for combat against human opponents wearing specific types of armor, in specific types of terrain, under specific historical conditions. But the principles underlying its use, balance, breathing, pattern recognition, adaptive response, those principles work in zero gravity, underwater, in hostile atmospheres, against opponents I've never encountered before." An 8th Mori student's gaseous form rippled with curiosity. "You mean the specific technique is less important than the underlying concepts?" "Precisely. And that's true for all human survival skills. We don't just learn to start fires with specific materials under specific conditions. We learn the principles of combustion, heat generation, and resource utilization that allow us to create fire using whatever materials are available." 7 chimed thoughtfully. "So, When you offered to teach us sword techniques, you were actually offering to teach us thinking patterns? Now you're getting it, Tara said with obvious approval. The sword work is just a vehicle for learning how to analyze complex physical problems and develop adaptive solutions. She looked around the group again. But before we go any further, I need to know, why do you want to learn this? What do you hope to gain from it? The question caught several students off guard. They exchanged glances, clearly not having considered their motivations deeply. Finally, a Gornathi student with particularly impressive tusks spoke up. I want to understand how humans became so effective at survival, despite obvious physical disadvantages. I want to learn the mental disciplines, added a Veltai student whose crystals were pulsing with harmonic frequencies. The way you remained calm under pressure, made rapid decisions, processed multiple variables simultaneously. Torgash was quiet for a long moment before answering. I want to understand why you chose not to hurt me when you easily could have. Where that decision came from, how it was made so quickly. Tara nodded seriously. Those are all excellent reasons, and they illustrate something important about human teaching methods. We don't just transfer techniques. We transfer decision-making frameworks. She gestured for the students to spread out, giving each of them enough space to move safely. Let's start with basic awareness exercises. The foundation of all human survival skills is what we call environmental consciousness. The ability to process information about your surroundings without becoming overwhelmed by the volume of data. For the next 20 minutes, Tara led the group through a series of exercises that seemed deceptively simple. Standing still while consciously observing everything in their visual field, walking while maintaining awareness of sounds and air currents, breathing patterns designed to enhance focus and reduce stress response. Professor Zenthara watched from his elevated position with growing fascination. He had expected the students to lose interest quickly. Most galactic species had difficulty maintaining attention on activities that didn't produce immediate, measurable results. Instead, he saw unprecedented levels of engagement and cooperation. Sylvan students were helping Kretek students adapt the breathing exercises to their different respiratory systems. Veltai students were sharing harmonic techniques that complemented the awareness training. Even the 8th Mori had modified their atmospheric containers to participate in the movement exercises. Now, Tara said as the exercises concluded, let's talk about application. Each of you comes from a different world with different environmental pressures. The specific techniques I use might not work for your species or your homeworld conditions, but the principles can be adapted. She pointed to a Merdani student in an aquatic mobility suit. Keldan. Your people are adapted for three-dimensional movement in fluid environments. How might you apply awareness training in an underwater setting? Keldan's translator conveyed surprise and interest. I never considered it. But the principles of processing environmental data while maintaining movement efficiency. Yes, I can see applications for navigation in murky water or avoiding aquatic predators. Exactly. And Grax Tar, she turned to the Kretek student. Your species has compound eyes that process visual information very differently from human eyes. How might that affect pattern recognition training? Grax Tar's wings buzzed with excitement. We see broader spectrums and notice motion patterns that mammals miss. But we sometimes have difficulty focusing on specific details. The awareness exercises could help us balance broad perception with focused analysis. Tara smiled broadly. Now you're thinking like humans, taking a general principle and figuring out how to apply it to your specific situation and capabilities. A new voice entered the conversation from the upper tiers of seating. Is this what you call MacGyvering? Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Dr. Yithara, the Dean of Xenobiological Studies, standing in the chamber's main entrance, with what appeared to be half the university's faculty behind her. Tara's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of actual nervousness she had shown all day. Dean Yithara, how long have you been observing? Long enough to be thoroughly impressed, the dean replied, descending the steps with her characteristic measured pace. Her species, the ancient and highly respected Zethkri, were known throughout the galaxy for their intellectual achievements and rigorous academic standards. Professor Zenthara, she continued, I received reports of a disturbance in your classroom. Imagine my surprise to discover one of the most effective cross-species educational demonstrations I've ever witnessed. Professor Zenthara's antennae flattened nervously. Dean, I can explain. The lesson plan was modified due to unexpected circumstances. The lesson plan, Dean Yathara interrupted gently, appears to have been improved dramatically by unexpected circumstances. Miss Hartwell, would you be willing to explain your teaching methodology to my colleagues? Tara glanced around at the assembled faculty. Representatives from every major academic department in the university. Then, back at the circle of students who were still eagerly awaiting the continuation of their lesson. I'm not sure I have a formal methodology, Dean. I was just sharing some basic concepts from my homeworld's educational traditions. Nonsense, said Dr. Kethvar from the Department of Applied Physics. What you've demonstrated is a revolutionary approach to cross-species knowledge transfer. You've managed to engage students from 12 different species in collaborative learning, focused on universal principles rather than species-specific techniques. Dr. Murthala from the psychology department stepped forward, her tentacles weaving patterns that indicated intense intellectual excitement. Moreover, you've demonstrated practical applications of stress management, rapid decision-making, and conflict resolution that appear to be effective regardless of species-specific psychology. Tara looked increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. Really, this is how we teach things on Earth. I didn't realize it was unusual. That, said Dean Yathara, is perhaps the most remarkable part. You've developed these methods so naturally that you don't even recognize their sophistication. She looked around the chamber, taking in the mixed groups of students who were still clustered together despite their usual tendency toward species segregation. Miss Hartwell, how would you feel about developing a formal curriculum based on these principles? We've been struggling with cross-species educational challenges for decades. Your approach appears to address several fundamental problems we haven't been able to solve. Before Tara could respond, Torgash stepped forward. Dean, if I may, what Tara has shown us isn't just about education. It's about survival skills that could benefit all our species. Seven's crystals chimed in agreement. The awareness training could help any species improve their environmental adaptation. The decision-making frameworks could be valuable for space exploration, diplomatic missions, emergency response. And the philosophical approaches, added the Gornathi student, the way humans balance individual capabilities with group cooperation, the flexibility in choosing appropriate responses to different situations. These could help improve interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. Unquote. Dean Yathara's expression showed surprise and growing interest. You believe these techniques have applications beyond academic settings? Absolutely, Tara said, finally finding her voice again. But I should emphasize that what I've shown you today is really just introductory material. Human survival training goes much deeper and covers much more complex situations. Such as? Prompted Dr. Yathara. Tara paused, considering how to explain. Well, we have techniques for maintaining group cohesion during extended isolation, methods for improvising solutions using minimal resources, protocols for establishing communication with unknown intelligent species, frameworks for rapid adaptation to completely alien environments. She trailed off, noticing the expressions of fascination on the faces around her. Tara, Dean Yathara said quietly, how much of this knowledge is shared among your species? Is this specialized training? Or common education? Common education, mostly. I mean, I've had more martial arts training than average, but the basic principles are taught to all human children. Problem solving, adaptability, environmental awareness, social cooperation. We consider these fundamental survival skills. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Professor Zenthara spoke. Tara, I believe you've inadvertently revealed why the Galactic Council classifies humans as a development species of special interest. It's not just that you survived on a death world, it's that you developed generalized survival capabilities that are effective across multiple environments and situations. Tara looked around the chamber, seeing her fellow students and the assembled faculty with new understanding. You mean, other species don't naturally develop these types of adaptive skills? Most species develop highly specialized adaptations to their specific environmental challenges, explained Dr. Murthala. But generalized adaptability of the type you've described is virtually unknown. It may be unique to Deathworld evolution. Dean Yithara stepped forward. Miss Hartwell, on behalf of the university, I would like to formally invite you to develop and teach a new cross-disciplinary curriculum based on human adaptive methodologies. This could be the foundation for a revolutionary approach to interspecies education and cooperation. Tara was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the faces of her fellow students. Students who had avoided her for months, but were now looking at her with respect, curiosity, and genuine friendship. I would be honored, Dean. But I'd want to structure it as a collaborative effort. Each species has unique capabilities and perspectives that could contribute to the overall curriculum. I may understand human methods, but I have a lot to learn about how other species approach survival and adaptation. Torgash stepped forward and extended his massive hand toward Tara. I would be honored to participate in such a program. And Tara, I apologize for my earlier behavior. I misunderstood what strength really means. Tara grasped his hand without hesitation. No apology necessary. You asked important questions that led to valuable discussions. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. As the faculty and students began making plans for the new curriculum, Professor Zenthara approached Tara quietly. Miss Hartwell, I have to ask, did you plan any of this? The confrontation with Torgash, taking over my lesson, demonstrating human capabilities? Tara looked genuinely surprised. Plan it? Professor, I was just trying to attend class and take notes. Everything that happened was just adaptive response to unexpected circumstances. Professor Zenthara's antennae twitched with what was definitely amusement this time. Ah, yes. Adaptive response to unexpected circumstances. I believe that may be the most perfectly human thing you've said all day. As the chamber gradually emptied, students from dozens of different species walked together in mixed groups, discussing concepts of adaptation, survival, and cooperation that had never occurred to them before. The careful segregation that had characterized Galactic University life for centuries was beginning to dissolve, replaced by something entirely new. Tara gathered her notebook and started toward the exit, only to find herself surrounded by students asking questions, requesting additional lessons, and proposing collaborative study groups. For the first time since arriving at the university, she didn't walk alone. Outside the lecture hall, Dean Yithara watched through the transparent walls as the most remarkable educational transformation she had ever witnessed continued to unfold. She made a mental note to contact the Galactic Council's Educational Commission immediately. They needed to know that the humans might be even more remarkable than anyone had suspected, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a new thought was beginning to form. If human educational methods could transform interspecies cooperation so dramatically, what else might they be capable of? What other aspects of galactic civilization could benefit from the adaptive perspectives of these remarkable Deathworlders? The possibilities were both exciting and slightly terrifying. But then again, she reflected with something resembling amusement. That was probably exactly how the humans preferred it.